Yeah. Do you know if Elaine's going to be joining us this week, Loretta? She wasn't here last week.
I'm not sure. I haven't spoken to her this week.
Okay. Hello, John.
Erica.
Good evening, everyone.
Hey, John. How are you?
Hey, John.
We'll give it a few more minutes. We've got
We're still waiting on a couple of
15, about
panelists.
20 people somewhere. More than 20 people, 20 locations.
Somebody's going to come on who was supposed to be a panelist. You can log in under the webinar. You can promote them. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Tell Lori that Sandy and Jean.
While we're waiting, just NYX. I know we had a problem getting you on last week. Can you hear us and can we hear you?
Yeah. Nick Breen, can you hear us this week? You should be allowed to talk. Can you hear us this week?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
That's good.
Okay.
Yes,
Great.
I can hear you, Bobby Mara.
How are you, Brian? I'm not saying.
Can I quickly explain? Nick's is my photography business. I am Brian Harkins, a classmate of Robert and Joanne's.
Oh, God, you're that old, huh?
Yes.
Well, as long as you've disclosed that, then.
Yeah, I've just come on in that. And hello, Loretta.
Hey, Brian, how are ya?
Good. And Rosalie, did you put your photograph into Loretta yet?
Yeah, where is it?
So Bob Mara, cover your ears. But,
I have one ready.
Brian, your pictures of Beachmont were beautiful, by the way.
Well,
Bob,
thank
cover
you.
your ears.
I don't have to cover my ears for that. I agree with you.
I want to know how Beachmont thinks it's the capital of Revere.
What makes you think they think they're part of Revere?
It always has been.
That's delusional at best.
Before your time, it has been.
All right, you have my full attention now.
Oh, Patrick
Okay.
Heath.
All right.
Well, it's about 4 minutes after, so why don't we try to stick to our usual schedule of beginning as close to on time as possible and ending by 8 o'clock. Welcome, everybody. I think everybody knows I'm Bob O'Brien. I certainly know all of you folks. And this is the fourth meeting of the master planning process with the Riverfront District Advisory Group. And as usual, we will have a presentation from our consultant team about where we have come to get to this point, and tonight particularly what we have to do as we look to implement some of our vision. I think we're actually, after 4 weeks, getting somewhat used to the virtual meeting process, very much thanks to our executive producer, Julie DeMauro, who keeps us all on track here. And with regard to that, just a brief housekeeping note. When you raise your hand, we make note of the fact that you've got a question waiting to be answered. Julie will then put your hand down, but you don't have to re-raise it again, because we know who you are and we will get to you in proper sequence.
So you go on this pad of paper, which you can see sometimes Bob and I are shuffling back and forth, and that's where everybody's names go.
Yeah. So you won't be lost. You don't have to raise it again unless you need to for some other reason.
Share screen permission.
So with that, I think everybody on the phone call, for the most part, has been here before.
No.
We didn't have Loretta with us last week, and I think Elaine, and I'm not sure whether
Okay.
Elaine is with us. You can be sure, Loretta, that a lot of the Riverside questions were asked by Eric, by Councilor Powers, by Lisa Peterson and others. But this will give you a chance to catch up as David reviews what has brought us to this stage. So without further ado, I will introduce our very competent consultant team headed up by Arrow Street and also including Copley Wolf and Lloyd's Register. So with that, David, it's all yours. It will soon be all yours.
You should.
All right, I was on mute.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
We're all guilty of that.
Tonight, like we have done in the previous meetings, we're going to start off with what we heard last time, the kind of the key takeaways and how we address those. This being our final meeting of this group of 4 meetings, we're going to kind of circle back to the overall master plan. And, you know, we've broken down at this point into components, and that's important because there's a lot of interdependencies in these different components, and we've tried to tie the things together that would potentially be funded or built together. And then finally, we'll talk about the steps to achieve the vision and the next steps that we're taking. This is really the fact-finding piece that allows us to put together the master plan to move forward. So last time, you know, we had presented a new plan and we had moved some pieces around. I think overall, the programming of the park was pretty unanimously, you know, appreciated and liked. The one real big issue, a couple big issues, the dog park we had moved kind of closer to Thayer, and you know there were some concerns from the neighborhood. So we have kind of taken another look and come up with another location for that. We also had some connections to the neighborhood in. It was really meant as a connection into the park, but it kind of showed up as a connection into the neighborhood. So we've kind of adjusted that. Really, the park pathways are a loop; they're not a connection into the neighborhood, and we'll show how that works. And then the other thing that we talked a lot about was the resiliency measures in the park and how that's going to impact the Riverside neighborhood. So at the time we didn't have engineering numbers, but in addition to kind of going over the capacities for the storm storage system, we've also made some other, with some information from the city, some engineering information from the city, we've made some other adjustments, which we'll talk about tonight, that will go further towards dealing with regular stormwater events. And then we did talk about the private development. And one of the big concerns there was really the impacts of that kind of development on the adjacent areas. And we can revisit that, talk about that, but rest assured that's really a key part of the permitting process for that project, and will be studied in depth with Concom and locally, site plan review, as well as MEPA at the state level. So, as I mentioned, we have updated the plan a little bit. And Sean, why don't you walk through the changes, the few changes that are here?
Yeah, so I guess I kind of learned my lesson last week. So I do want to take just a minor step back. I don't want to focus a lot on this. We can kind of talk about the changes, but I do know there's probably at least a couple new faces, and I know there's a couple people here tonight that weren't with us last week. So definitely throughout the park design, probably the big move, which gives us a lot more green and a lot more real estate within the park, was the reconfiguring of the on and off ramps off of 1A. So instead of the two big loops, for those of you who haven't seen this is all kind of being developed and studied in conjunction with the new General Edwards Bridge. So as you look at the roundabout, it's kind of the central feature, but what we really get out of that opportunity is some additional usable, programmable park space, which is what you're seeing in the upper right of the roundabout. So it's a great opportunity for the park and the neighborhood itself. So that location, in addition to getting more green space, it also allows us to really create a new front door, and it is the primary access into the park itself.
Oh, yeah, so it reroutes any traffic to Gibson Park that's not direct neighborhood traffic. It reroutes that traffic to be accessed from Route 1A. Right now, the traffic comes from 1A. It has to go through Riverside, down Mills Ave to Thayer to get to parking. This change in the off-ramps, this additional park space that we gain, allows all traffic that needs to and wants to get to Gibson Park to come directly from 1A, unless it's obviously from Point of Pines or Riverside, which would both still have access. There's no direct vehicular access through the Riverside neighborhood other than what would be an emergency access, which would go through the end of the boatworks.
So for the park components, once again, the multi-use field is what you see, the larger, lighter green shade that allows us to do a full-length football that runs top to bottom on the sheet. There are two U10 soccer fields that are running perpendicular to that are in the center. And then we have one larger U12 field that runs pretty much the length of the football field as well. So we have great flexibility as far as the soccer fields, the Little League and the softball backstop and infield is exactly in its current location. Directly to the lower right would be the existing playground. Exactly, and then right above that is the existing tennis court. So those pretty much are all existing components as they are today. Right above that, we have introduced two hard court pickleball courts. And then above that is really trying to keep a very open and walkway, passive green space as you get out closer to the points of the corner, I guess, of the site that projects out onto the water on two sides, which is pretty amazing. So you've got the really great public space and the passive kind of walkway system, much like you have right now. Along that water's edge, though, as you come back towards the park, we're looking at some introduction of salt marsh for some stormwater elements, which John and Jay will talk about in greater detail, but it does allow us to have more of an elevated walkway or boardwalk within that white section and opportunities for overlooks. As you start to come further south on the page, we turn back into more of a walkway path with a little kind of break off there that we are talking about the introduction of maybe reusing some of the existing salvaged seawall stones that are out on site. There would be some great opportunities for basically overlooks or seating, kind of, I won't call it stadium style because it's really only 2 or 3 kind of rows, but it would be some great flexible kind of informal seating, if you will, to be able to watch events on the river, to be able to just sit and watch the sunset. Obviously, Boston's out in the distance with the skylight at night. So it could be some really great, just kind of informal seating along the water's edge. And once again, it's what we're trying to do is really get you to more interaction with the river and the water itself. And then as we go further south on the page, once again, continuing on with the development of interaction with the water, there is the dock that's right there, and that's meant to be really a key element to support the boathouse to the lower left. We've talked, obviously, in one of the earlier meetings about more of a community boating component there with kayaks, shells, canoes, those type of really shallow kind of water bottom boats, if you will, and keeping that as a great amenity to the park as well. And then as you start to move to the lower right, 2 new tennis courts. We know that we need 4 courts within the park in order to continue to support the high school's athletic program is there. So we have 4 of those there as a whole, if you will. And then to the right of the new tennis courts that Amy's pointing at right now with the cursor would be a new location for the community gardens. The current location just to the right of the existing courts starts to get negatively impacted, if you will, relative to the proximity to the road. Some, I think, improved pedestrian circulation through that area. So we felt it was important to kind of relocate those to that location. Still plenty of sun. Central access is really good. And then we've added additional parking. If you go to the kind of the upper, right there, there's a dash line between that lot. Essentially, that's the limit of the current parking. what we're doing is looking to expand that in a double layout in that first portion. And then as we get a little more restricted with space in the area closer to Riverside, it's really a single loaded lot. And then creating a introduction of a green buffer between that parking lot and the neighborhood, as well as the introduction of rain gardens that Jay and John will definitely talk about in greater detail. But you can imagine those being really nice green spaces that are providing some separation and some visual buffering between the parking in that location as well as the neighborhood that certainly doesn't exist today. And then the little kind of amoeba shaped, if you will, dog park that used to be closer to Thayer and a little bit closer, obviously, to the Riverside neighborhood and the direct neighbors right there. We've pulled that a little bit closer to the parking lot. We're also just kind of wedging that in, if you will, between the parking and the grade changes that are currently happening between the on-ramp and the parking. So it starts to be a little bit more of a linear sliver, if you will, as opposed to a larger, more rectangular shape. Starting to pull that back. And once again, as you see within the green kind of circles on the plans, we're starting to get some screening and separation from the on-ramps as well as from the dog park, from the kind of the street edges and the community down in Riverside as well. So the red and the pink lines that kind of run through there is our kind of loop circulation, as Dave mentioned, that runs kind of throughout the park, connecting all the components. As you move to the right of the roundabout, we're introducing a new full court basketball. So we're taking out the half court that's there right now and adding a new full-size basketball court there. And some additional parking is in that first bay, exactly right in that location, which gets us to a total of roughly 95 spaces on the plan as it exists today. The red dot in the center, there's been a desire to have a bit of an iconic gateway into the park itself. So we're looking at a key element that could be positioned there. Let's see, and then I should go back and talk a little bit more about the water activation as we get closer to the development parcel. We get into more of I think, a great opportunity for kind of a public space out on the point of the, yes, exactly. At that location, you've got this fantastic water views on pretty much both sides of you at that location. And then as that pink walk starts to move closer to the lower right, it turns into more of a kind of a walkway with platform seatings and planting and flexible tables and chair seating, you can imagine, out of that location, and continues to make the connection over to the public pier, which would be, once again, another amazing amenity to be able to actually get out over the water. As to a lot of our other locations, we're simply getting down to the water. So that would be another way to see it and interact with the water. And then likewise, to continue that pink path as you get closer to 1A, making the connection with the future restaurant and the public space there. And then as the bridge itself is redone and gives us the opportunity to create some additional head height under that bridge, be able to link to the DCR properties that would be on the Point of Pines side of that bridge as well. So really trying to get an overall connection of pedestrian as well as bikes. And as David mentioned, really trying to limit the car activity to really coming in underneath 1A at that central location.
So a couple of things, in terms of the private development, one of the uses we talked about last week was actually a small restaurant cafe in the early stages of the residential development. Obviously, the Mirage site is a terrific, and we talked about this last week, it's a terrific future restaurant site. It will become more valuable as the private development and new residents come to this area. So we feel very confident that at some point in the future that will get, obviously it's under private ownership. We can't do anything about that right now, but it really is great potential. There's not a lot of, if that restaurant were torn down, you couldn't build in that same location. You could only build, public accommodation or waterfront uses. So there's a great opportunity there for somebody. There would be some retail restaurant in the proposed building, and at the far point, kind of at the northwest, there's also potential for a community room. There's some amenity space that would be there that could be double as a community meeting space. Also in the private development area, on the way to that public pier, that actually became the home for the bocce court. We didn't get a chance to talk about that last week, but we talked through this with the developers as an idea of building that as part of their project. I'm thinking about that as a really great location, a kind of a quiet location with great views for that use. So one of the things that Sean touched on was a number of the existing uses that remain in the same place. So the golf uses remain in the same place. You know, the tennis in the early phases until some of the other changes happen, until the field gets built, could stay in the same place. And it was intentional to try to, kind of reduce some of the disruption of the park, but also to kind of stretch the funding dollars as much as possible and, you know, get the most program in this park that we could.
Make, and I think this is a very complete illustration, is that the building down the lower middle part, just east of Route 1A, is the new Point of Pines Fire Station, for which we have Councilor Powers to thank, and we probably should label that as, you know, an integral part of the Riverfront community.
Okay. So we wanted to, as we mentioned, we wanted to kind of talk about the components, and not in any particular order, because I think, you know, as we talked with the city, as things move forward, obviously, you know, there's going to need to be flexibility about what could happen when, but there are definitely some pieces that could happen very quickly. In the community boating, there's a lot of momentum there. So, you know, the community boating is here. It's a renovation of the existing building, very much likely making it more resilient, making it much more attractive to the neighborhood, and making it much more welcoming. The thought is that facility could have restrooms that are open to the park as well. It's a great opportunity. Obviously, a facility like this that would be for, you know, for kids and community that has sort of kind of classroom kind of events as well as boat storage would need those kind of facilities, and designing those in a way that could be shared with the park really is a benefit to both. So we just have some images of, you know, kind of the activities, some images of the needs for the park, for the building, and some images of what the look and feel could be. Obviously this is something else, but it's an idea that, you know, the building itself could be renovated, have art, and be a very vibrant part of the neighborhood. The next component that we want to talk about is really one of the major components, and you can see how much of the park area it takes up. So obviously it's the multi-use field, it's some of the tennis courts, it's some of the parking, but what's really important here is the stormwater management system. So I'm going to let Jay and John talk about that in a bit more detail.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So, nice to be with everyone again tonight. Last week, you know, people were looking for some more details. Let's go back to that previous slide. Yeah. And how we can propose interventions with the stormwater system, we really need to understand what's going on in the existing condition, where the flooding's coming from, why it's happening. So to provide a better detail of what we looked at, we took the Google Earth aerial and we marked it up with the tributary drainage areas. So what that means is really it's just looking at the topography that's happening, this water just goes from the high to a low point. So finding where all the high points and low points are and just looking to see how, with the existing infrastructure on site, where those water discharges to. So there's really 5 tributary drainage areas within our study area. Technically there's a 6th, which is the North Shore Road, but that kind of handles in and of itself. It's got like internal drainage and it takes it kind of away from our system. But what we have, it's all catch basin and pipe system, which is your conventional drainage structures where you capture the water, you get it subsurface, and you send it away till you get to an outfall. That's how things work, you know, all over the nation. However, the factors that we have here, particularly on the John Avenue outfall, and the one that's just north of River Ave and Mills and the Gibson Park outfalls. Those are the three outfalls we have. They are tidally influenced. So when the tide is up, you can't discharge water. So you're creating, there's got a tide gate on it, so it doesn't allow the river to come back in, but it doesn't want to allow any water to discharge. So it's just that conventional system. There is no storage capacity, no offline storage capacity, which isn't, like I said, conventionally what you would do. So what the storage capacity becomes is flooding, and that goes to the low points. And in this area, it's really the boat works. You know, further down Mills Ave, there's other areas where it gets low, and that's where the flooding happens. But it's the boat works, and it works its way back up. So we want to look at, well, how can we help that? Obviously, the MVP study, which is starting, I think, next Tuesday is the first public meeting. It's going to look at the area at a much larger scale, but we can still influence this Thayer Ave, this kind of purple bluish shade that I've shown over here. We can help control some of that stormwater going over there. And I just want to point out too, for the G&J properties, there's no conventional controls on that. It's kind of, as they mentioned last week, just overland flow. However, the topography brings it up north towards the Saugus River. So it doesn't come towards Point of Pines, doesn't go to the east. It doesn't go even to the Pines River to the west. It really goes north. And I guess part of it, that green part, goes northwest. But it's this overland flow that goes into the Pines River. And that drainage system will remain as it is. And what North Shore Road does, because it's elevated and it goes through everything, it kind of bisects everything, and it creates like a natural storm barrier other than, you know, the path over the Point of Pines network. But like I said, it's kind of a drainage system contained in and of itself. So I want to go to the next slide and talk about, kind of explain in more detail what we've been talking about with this subsurface storage. So this is, I think we showed this in our first meeting, but this is just kind of a cross-section detail. It shows you of how you can have a conventional field where you look at it from the surface, it just looks like a park, a field, there's, you know, gazebo, is whatever. We're going to use it for soccer like it's shown there. But in the subsurface, you have chambers. They can be concrete, they can be plastic, and they're based on crushed stone. And what that can do is provide you offline storage, particularly when the tide is up. And we'll talk about that in another slide or two as well, to help store some of this, maybe infiltrate into the ground, but at least when the tide is up, have a place for the water to go so it's not flooding into the streets or into people's properties, which is what we want to avoid. So we're, as David mentioned at the top, we kind of looked at some of the infrastructure the city has and working with them, kicking around some ideas. And we think we can actually put in a relief valve into the existing infrastructure by tapping into one of the catch basins. And then with our storm pump station that we were going to put that relief valve into the system. So as the system backs up, it goes out our relief valve into our pump system, and we're able to pump it into our subsurface storage. And in addition to support that, we're going to have a tow drain and some rain gardens. And we're also going to be taking off, I think we mentioned in the first couple meetings, about 14,000 square feet of drainage area from the embankment that's coming off of North Shore Road that actually goes into the neighborhood now, goes across onto Hayes. And we're going to take that off with bioswales and direct it into Gibson Park and into our rain gardens and our subsurface storage. So what this slide is showing here is kind of three different setups. The top is what the existing happens. As you can see, when the Pines River is low at the lower end of the tide cycles, water goes into the catch basins and it goes through the outfall and it's able to freely discharge. However, in the middle, as you can see, as the tide rises, there's a tide gate on it, and all it is a flap, so that when tide is open, it allows to discharge, but when the water comes and pushes pressures of it doesn't let the water come back into the system and flood the neighborhood. It doesn't allow the discharge. So what happens is we have a backup into those catch basins, into our pipes, and it has nowhere for it to go because it can't discharge into the Pines River. So it backs up and it starts to flood Mills, Ave, Thayer, Hayes, all that area. So what we're going to do, we're proposing is to, on that bottom slide you can see, and it's a very simplified diagram, but it gets to the point that when the tide gate is closed and there's nowhere for the water to go, if you put in another drainage pipe into that catch basin, it can then go into our subsurface system, be pumped up, and you have a lot more storage area. Now, if we can go to the next one, how much storage area do we have? We have about 1.6 to 2 acre feet of water. Now, what that means is if you looked at the boatwork site today as it is, that's enough storage that if there was 15 to 18 inches of water on that site standing alone, that's how much we can contain underneath this field here. That's what that kind of, the big cyan picture is showing here. So it's a significant amount of water when there's currently nothing. So again, in the current time, when it's high tide, there's nowhere for it to go. It just backs up to the lowest points. Here, we're able to move it, put it to a safe place where it doesn't have as much damage. We can get almost up to a 10-year storm. And that's just one of the pieces that we're going to be proposing to deal with stormwater, with floodwater, and with the resiliency. So as you can see throughout here, I talked earlier about removing some of the drainage from North Shore Roads, and at the bottom, you'll see the bioswale. That's going to direct the water away from the neighborhood and towards our stormwater infrastructure where we have rain gardens, and we'll have overflows so we can go into our subsurface storage system. We'll have the tow drain.
John, Loretta Centra does have a question. Frank also has a comment, and I have a question as well, which is that the capacity under the field is a function of the grade level of the field itself. Conceivably, if we raise the field somewhat, we could increase the capacity. Is that correct?
Yes. It's not to infinity because you're in the floodplain, but yes.
Yeah. Frank?
I just want to emphasize what John is saying and how important it is. This system that is being designed is going to be very effective in terms of the small, high-frequency storms that we see all the time. These are nuisance storms, 5-year events, 10-year events, 1-year events that cause flooding in the neighborhood. This system
Storms at this high
will
tide.
handle those nuisance storms,
Not muted.
which cause problems in the neighborhood of flooding. And I think it's a very important note to make, because although it's not going to handle the large storms, the MVP program is going to look at a more comprehensive approach. But the nuisance storms that plague this neighborhood from week to week, sometimes in the winter months, is going to be mitigated by these flood measures.
Okay, we have 3 questions at the moment. We'll start with Loretta, then go to Eric, and then go to Nick. So, Loretta, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bob. How important are the tide gates that you mentioned at Air Ave and John Ave in terms of making this system work properly?
So tide gates are very critical. They need to be functioning. If they're self-regulating, tide gates need to have all their floats on them. They need to be maintained. But yeah, tide gates play a very important function because what they do is they keep the river out from, because that's extra capacity that the system is not designed to handle and it shouldn't have to handle. So they play an important function in their respect.
Are these existing tide gates? Are you talking about existing tide gates or tide gates that are going to be installed?
I believe they're existing tide gates. I know on John Ave there's a tide gate. I don't know the one on Gibson Park is a tide gate.
So what we have at the intersection of John Ave and Mills Ave is there's an outfall pipe that runs the length of John Ave. It actually runs underneath North Shore Road. It runs underneath a landing that is currently in a state of collapse, and it is crushing that outfall pipe. And we've been, and Frank, you may be aware of this, we've been asking about this for years as to what can be done, because that's collapsing, and once it does that, it will crush that outfall pipe.
Yeah, North Shore Road will flood.
And North Shore Road will flood because North Shore Road drains into that pipe. I'm also aware of a flood tidal gate that you mentioned at River Ave and Mills Ave. And I wish Elaine Hurley, if she's on here, help me out here, because Elaine, you've told me that floodgate does not operate. They installed it.
Elaine, do you want to clarify? And then Frank has a comment as well. Elaine? You may be muted, Elaine.
Am I mute on?
Yep, you're okay.
Good now.
Okay. There's no tide gate on that at all. They put one in a couple of years ago. It lasted maybe one tide and it was gone. We haven't had them. I'm here 46 years. We haven't had them.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, they would play a crucial role. They should be installed. I did see the plans from when they put them in a couple of years ago. I wasn't aware that there's no longer functional. It does play a crucial role.
Frank may be able to clarify this just a bit. Frank?
No, the city did put, you call them tie gates, we call them check valves. They just prevent the seawater from coming into the system and allow it to drain out at low tide. Basically, it's like a gravity tie gate. So
yeah, I believe, Frank, they were inline check valves, weren't they? So they wouldn't be seen from the surface, weren't they? I was looking back at the plans. Yeah. So that's another thing too. I mean, you might not see, it might not be the big tie gate structure you're looking at, but it's an inline check valve, and that's another system.
Yeah,
it's fair to say that system and the operation of that system is going to be studied as part of the MVP, and any work that happens on this, obviously those repairs would need to be made as well so that the system functioned properly as a whole.
They probably the same problems.
Exactly. Okay, I think Eric Lampadecchio, you have a question, comment?
Yeah, just a couple of things. Just an initial concern, Bob, over the comments about elevating the ball field and what that might do to displacing water into the actual neighborhood. I'm just concerned that if we were to do such an elevation that might occur. I'm not sure.
That's a very valid point, and you're 100% spot on. That's why I kind of wanted to say we can't go to infinity, because then you're creating a mountain, you're pushing water to other places. So Sean and I, we've been talking about over the past couple of weeks doing landscape sculpting. So we would elevate parts of the ball field. The diamond of the baseball is kind of the highest part of the ball field, and we would kind of bring everything up to that level. And you have to have anyways just a slight pitch. It's kind of invisible to the naked eye anyways to get drainage when they grade it, but you'd have a slight pitch across the ball field. But all that filling would be offset. So again, you would have a net zero is what we're shooting for in terms of a cut fill balance is what they call it in construction, so that you wouldn't be filling anymore, you wouldn't be cutting anymore, that wherever grades are on site, they're just displaced to somewhere else, so that you're not pushing water to another place. And then with everything that we're doing, there's going to be stormwater controls for all the new features as well. That it will be, and we'll kind of talk about that in the permitting process, but for any time you go ahead and make an improvement or even a redevelopment, anytime you kind of put a shovel in the ground when you're within a wetland resource buffer area, which we are with the rivers, you have to show that you're controlling stormwater, you're managing it, and you're improving current situation. Even if it's not your problem or your intention, you have to make it better than how you found it.
Okay, I have another question too. It might even be an opportunity. Could you go to your other slide where it shows the ball field and the projection for the flood storage capacity? Was there any consideration to extend that even more north? So where that subsurface storage is listed, perhaps that could become enlarged by going further north underneath the additional green space?
Yeah, absolutely. So the subsurface storage is essentially a modular system. Most of these chambers are, 3 feet by 8 feet long or 4 feet by 8 feet long. So you kind of piece them together by Legos. So you could, however, that's the lower part. So as we talk about raising up the field, that would be slightly lower. It wouldn't be low, but it would be lower. So you might not have enough grade to keep it, because you have to keep these chambers above the groundwater level. So it's something that could be looked at with, as the final design gets really developed, but it certainly is an opportunity.
And we would look at bringing them to the south as well, if we could put them under the tennis courts effectively and shorten up the pipe connection to those as well.
Eric, I think the one thing we want to just kind of keep in mind, and it's a really good balancing act, is the placement of those underground structures they really don't play nicely with trees. So the ability to get some trees, I think, would be really great for the park, understanding, just making sure that works, obviously, with the storm components as well. So it's definitely a very integrated system we're looking at here. But absolutely, those are definitely opportunities to expand upon that storage capacity. Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. Eric, do you have another question? Or okay, very good. Let's move on to Nick Molason, our chairman of the Conservation Commission. Nick,
how are you, Bob? Can you hear me? Okay.
I can. Yeah.
Okay, so my concerns are going to be these outfalls, and I know that Elaine Hurley and Loretta will know better than anybody. These outfalls, whatever they are, and I know Frank, we put them in a few years ago. They all got to be working properly. So I just want to make sure that every one of these is going to be tested, and if they're not there, like Elaine is saying, it's not even there anymore. So are we going to make sure that all these outfalls are up to par and working properly?
I think the answer to that is yes, Nick. And I think David suggested as much, and I'm sure Frank would support him in that. If the system doesn't work, obviously it has negative implications for everything that depends upon it. So a good point, but yes, we will definitely.
Obviously, like I mentioned last week, and I had asked John this last week, there's no storage there right now. So the storage they're gonna put is gonna be a major improvement for this area. Then hopefully with the new project that we're gonna do, that we're gonna start talking about next week, MVP, I think it'll work well, and hopefully we can keep the neighborhood happy and being from underwater all the time at every storm. But that's it. Thank you, guys.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, John, you can continue on with your presentation.
Yeah. So just to kind of highlight that, I mean, your stormwater management system's only as strong as its weakest link. So if the tide gates aren't functioning or they're not operating as they're intended, sometimes debris gets in there and it could kick the system out. So the check valve doesn't close properly. It doesn't get a good seal. That's an issue. So we'll certainly make a recommendation that these outfalls be investigated or upgraded as it goes through. It can just be put in some redundancy. There's multiple options, but you guys are all 100% on that. It needs to function in here. So I'm not gonna kill this. I can go on and on for hours on this stuff, but I just want to highlight really that we're trying to show. We did this with the colors to show that it's really a full approach throughout the whole 19 acres that we're looking at, that there's going to be stormwater controls throughout. And the idea with the rain gardens, with the porous pavement, with the bioswales is to keep the water treated locally, keep it from concentrating to really collecting to where it gets ahead of steam, where it's tougher to manage. So if we can kind of break out our tributary areas, like I was talking about earlier, if we can make micro tributary areas that go to these stormwater EMP features, that's going to be making a big difference. It's going to cut down on the velocity that it gets, the amount of volume that builds up, and also the peak times when they hit. If you buy yourself 20 minutes, it might be very important to get a peak that hits at one point, and then 20 minutes later you get the second peak rather than the same one together where they build up on top of each other. So that's very important. And what we've been talking about mostly tonight, at least I have been talking about, has been the stormwater, from rain events that's falling onto our sites. But there's also the issue, and it really is going to be discussed even more in the MVP study, because, we're only 19 acres and, this whole, the Rumney Marsh area is 2,000 acres. So there's a lot of area, we're talking about storm surge, that there's a lot of flooding that can come in. But what we can do and what we were proposing to do, one of the most effective things that won't exacerbate situations in the neighborhoods or in Point of Pines would be to create salt marshes. Salt marshes are great. They're a natural habitat, so they're good, for birds, love them, fish love them. They're just, well, I shouldn't say fish, but sea creatures love them. And what they do is they cut down the velocity, so they'll cut down on the waves, they'll slow down storm surge, and they'll also trap sediment that comes in. So a lot of times what happens is you get a storm surge that comes in, it tops over a seawall, and it brings a load of crap with it. And that crap gets into your storm drain system, and it clogs it up for the next time. So it has like lingering effects. But with the salt marsh, taking some of that sediment out of the thing, what it actually does is it's kind of a self-reinforcing cycle where the sediment gets trapped within the salt marsh, and it builds up and it comes part of the salt marsh, and the salt marsh is like slowly building itself up over time to deal with sea level rise. It's kind of a self-reinforcing resilient structure. So we can have the potential of up to a half an acre of new salt marsh here, which will help. And again, the MVP study, we've already met with them. They're a very talented team. They got a lot of great ideas that I think you guys are going to be talking about next week, where they're going to have something look at a much larger area, because that's really how you have to deal with storm surge. It is in a larger area. So they're going to come up with some great ideas for that. So this is just really looking, overall at how the stormwater and flooding improvements, how we're attacking it from all different angles with a lot of different strategies too. Some work better than others, some have different targets. So for different type storms, different concerns, we're really trying to provide full coverage. And it really, when we get into design and permitting, and we'll talk about that later, this is going to be a marked improvement, significant over the current situation. You're going to have water quality controls and volume controls, two things that will really make a big difference on the flooding So I think we can go to the next slide.
And John, if I could just add real quickly that as we studied this, we recognized that this was a very complicated system and a complicated set of problems. We really pulled all the tools out of the toolbox to apply it here. So there's both underground solutions with piping and storage, and there's surface conveyance of water. And we're really trying to, and sculpting of land and use of rain gardens and bioswales and marshes. And we've really kind of integrated everything we can to try to maximize the improvements that are going to be made for the stormwater systems.
Yeah, it's a great point. Absolutely.
I want to talk a little bit about the shorelines and just the kind of the water activation. I mean, definitely one of the goals that we heard early on was really about the ability, you've got a great, amazing park. It's on the water, but the ability to get to the water, interact with the water, enjoy the water from a closer relationship is a little bit limiting in its current conditions. So what we're looking is certainly the way in the kind of the image you're seeing across the top are kind of character images of where we'd like to kind of go based on the conversations we've had as a group here. We've got boardwalks, and I think we have the opportunity to do some of those that are a little more elevated, like you would see in the upper left, that could get out over those salt marshes, and you're closer to the water in a different way. I think there's opportunities like you see in the center where we're closer probably to the fields and the soccer, where we would not necessarily need the railings, and we would be kind of more walking through a grassy slope, but you're not getting the height drop off along the edges. And then likewise, there's going to be a fair amount of more naturalized, if you will, plantings as well. So it's kind of moving away from some of the the image we saw last week along the development site with the asphalt along the edges. This is really just starting to get much more, as John mentioned, to a naturalized kind of character, and the opportunity here for the plant material and to create more of a seasonal aspect of the water's edge is really going to be amazing.
And I think John and Jay touched on it really well. This is not just a great public amenity, it's also a resiliency measure along this edge. So it's going to, shore up that edge of the site, which will continue on into the private development site. So we touched on this earlier, the change in the access from 1A. So, the benefits there include obviously the additional parkland, but really it's the major benefit here is the change to the flow of traffic, really making the access to Gibson Park, available to everyone without impacting one particular neighborhood. And then I think it was touched on a little bit, so that there's an underpass there that will become part of a pedestrian access point for the Point of Pine neighborhoods, and treating that, it's going to become the front door to the park. It's also going to become the front door to any development. So treating that underpass with careful attention, and whether, it's lighting or paint, but making it a really welcoming and inviting entry point, unlike what we show in our rendering, which shows a black hole. But
and I think the other thing too to mention, we talk about pads, but I think the other thing that we would like to be able to stress, whether this is through separate bikeways or multi-use paths, but once again, to be able to promote bicycle usage as well as pedestrians, to be able to get to the park and really keep the community aspect of this and the easy access to it is basically an amazing opportunity.
John and David, I believe Eric has a question or comment. Eric?
Thanks, Bob. I have two questions. The first is the access point to the potential development site and the retail component. Will that access point come down to the rotary? And why did you choose to come down to the rotary rather than leverage the existing access point?
Well, the existing access point from 1A, actually, it's not a great traffic situation, to be honest. If MassDOT is making these adjustments to the site, they're not going to want to have an exit point and an entry point that close to that other ramp. So there are very real traffic considerations here. Then ultimately, the General Edwards Bridge, if that actually gets raised so that it doesn't have to become a drawbridge, that portion the elevation would start to go up, and you can sort of see it in this view. It would go up higher than the existing grades there, and that access point would no longer be viable. That's a ways off in the future, but the more important piece is just public safety and, traffic flow.
So that's leading a nice segue to my second question about public safety and considering exiting the rotary and heading on the 1A southbound projection you have here. Where does that on-ramp intersect with 1A? I know last week we talked about it and there was some concerns that it would intersect around the John Avenue intersection. In this image, it looks like it's much sooner than that. It would be almost as if it was parallel with Thayer. Can you just speak to where that on-ramp would actually intersect?
We believe it's parallel. It's about at the Thayer point.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. It's a good improvement.
So last week we talked a lot about the private development. The developers were here, and I know a few were here tonight. The edge is part of the park network. It continues that resiliency strategy along the edge of the entire site. The walkway is a public walkway. The end of the building, we talked about this earlier, the end of the building here is that kind of amenity space that it could be a location for a coffee shop or some other retail. We could also end up with retail on this side of the site. It's really a question of, as this gets developed, as it goes through planning and permitting, those things will get worked out. It's kind of thinking about what works best for the project as a whole and this as part of the master plan as a whole. The project, as was discussed last week, is somewhere in the range of 280 units with the majority of the parking for the project underneath with, it's not highlighted here, but some additional surface parking.
And I think the other thing to remember or kind of talk about is it's showing up as kind of this pink or kind of orange color. It is a walkway, kind of an important link along that water's edge, but there's also, I think, a lot of flexibility. We've definitely got some different edge conditions here, and I think the intent certainly is to promote opportunities for seating, gathering, and kind of, these could be some great places certain times of the day or certain times of the year that you might want to hang out over here more so than along the other areas. So once again, it's really more than just kind of the pathway to get from A to B. It should be a part of that kind of whole water's edge experience and having that energized and activated, as David mentioned, through the retail. It's definitely a new component. But likewise, we've got some different water edge conditions as well that will kind of continue to add to the overall experience along the water's edge.
John, I think Eric has the floor again, and then Jay Bolton has a question after that. Eric?
Thanks, Bob. Just a couple of questions on the proposal for the development. I know we talked about it last week, and I spent some time this week doing some homework and research on the developer. I got a lot of positive feedback from folks that live in those locations as well as folks that work in those locations. In looking a little bit more closely, I have some concerns specifically around parking. I know that they were looking for a 1-to-1 ratio, which would be a variance from the 1.6 typically required of a development of this size. And I also saw that they are charging for parking for some of their other developments. So I'm curious, is the plan to charge for these parking spaces? And if so, I have some very real concerns on how that might impact the abutting neighborhood, as well as the abutting parking spaces for Gibson Park.
I believe Damien actually might be on the call. Damien, if you want to speak to that. I will say this with regard to the possibility of impacting the adjacent neighborhoods. As we noted last time, this project and any multi-family project actually in Revere will not have on-street parking privileges. They will not be eligible for parking permits either in Point of Pines, Riverside, or anywhere else in Revere. So whatever parking ratio is provided for this parcel, and that has yet to be decided and will be decided through the site plan review and possibly the zoning board of appeal process. I believe Michael Tucker is actually the chairman of the ZBA, but they will have to live with that. So there is no circumstance under which this will have an adverse impact on the adjacent neighborhoods. But Damien, if you are on the call, could you speak to the charge for parking issue, which I don't believe is the case, but perhaps you could address it.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Hi, Eric. How you doing? Yes. So a few years ago, the city instituted a policy where new developments would have to include the cost of parking into the lease itself. Previous developments, and I believe One Beachmont was not subject to that, has the ability to charge for parking. What's happened over time is that issue was really spurred by kind of a very high parking charge at one of the buildings on the beach that led to people not accepting parking. So what we've been doing in our buildings is the parking is actually included in the rent. However, if you choose not to have parking, your rent is actually reduced by that amount. So we haven't had any pushback related to that, and we haven't had any issues with any people parking in any of the neighborhoods of any of the projects. So right now, parking charges for those people who are allowed to park, who are allowed to charge for parking in Revere, the going rate right now is roughly $75 to $85, and that's been accepted largely by the marketplace for those people who can charge. And I think the issue that had occurred a number of years ago with one of these developments, they were charging like $200 for parking, which by no means is market, and that was forcing people out on the street. And so we're not having that condition anymore.
I would note too that that particular project that Damien is referring to subsequently did come back to the Zoning Board of Appeal for a parking variance as a result of some modifications and renovations they were doing, and that restriction is now applied to them as well. So all of the developments on Ocean Avenue have to include parking in the rent and have no right to park on the street. Rosalie Vincent, I believe, has a question, and I'm sorry, Rosalie, I had mentioned Jay Bolton before, and then we'll get to you, Representative Vincent. Jay, do you have a comment?
Yes, similar along Eric's lines. I guess we talked on one of the meetings about, a big football game, needing those 95 parking spots at Gibson Park. And when you think about we're a guest of the owners of these units or the residents of these units, brings up a question in my mind how to limit that to.
Jay, we're losing you a little bit.
Okay, ready to go.
Hold on.
Oh, is that you, Jay?
I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Now we can. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Hold on. I'm inside of an area where the signal might not be that good. So I was saying similar along Eric's lines about the park.
Jay,
I think his question is about if there's a large game, where it's going to go.
Yeah, I think the question, sorry, I think the question is if the park needs the 95 spaces for an event, and, there's no additional parking for the residential building, where do the residents guests park as well? Or are they actually kind of blending over into those park spaces and causing the 95 to be really less than 95?
David, do you want to answer that, or Damien? Or
I'm happy to answer. So based upon the level of visitors to these buildings that we have in Revere and the demand for parking that we're actually seeing closer to a 0.7, 0.8 in the buildings that are a little bit closer to transit, we can accommodate guest parking in that ratio, and we feel very confident about that. We have no issues with that.
And I think, to be clear, the 95 spaces that David or Sean identified earlier are independent of the parking for the residents of the development. Right. Now, it's possible, I suppose, that there could be occasionally an event that would attract more than that. And I think there might have to be some temporary adaptability of parking, perhaps on green space or something like that. But I don't think typically the demands for parking should exceed the 95. It's not meant to be that sort of a facility.
Bob, hey, it's Jay. Can you hear me?
Yes, Jay, we can.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I was going in and out there. How many parking spots, and maybe I missed this along the line, are going to be issued for the building, both underneath and to the side? I'm curious how many spots there will be?
Well, I don't think there's been a final determination of the unit count, but it will be sufficient to handle all the residents. So
Okay.
it would be in the range of 250 to 300 spaces, let's say.
Okay, gotcha. All right, thank you.
Okay. Representative Vincent.
Yes, hi, good evening, everyone. I just want to also share my two things. Number one, I mentioned it at the meeting that I was at a couple of weeks ago. The parking, I'm very concerned about parking, especially because the Riverside and the Point of Pines neighborhoods really are inundated and right now with cars. They don't have enough parking as it is. Even though they supposedly have resident parking, it's really not resident parking because it's only from midnight to 6 o'clock, and that really would not really help the people in Riverside or in the Point of Pines. Number one, so parking is a real concern to me. The second number two is that again, both the Riverside and the Point of Pines are very single-family neighborhoods. I love the idea of the park in that whole area. If that is where it's going to concentrate, but I don't understand why we would be trying to putting the Pines and the Riverside sections of the city together. Why would they be integrated? What would give anyone a reason to go into the Pines? Because it's a private neighborhood. Why would we don't want to be integrating the new development with the Point of Pines area or the Riverside?
Well,
I'm not understanding that. I understand that it would be a nice amenity for Riverside and the Pines to utilize that new area, but I can't imagine what good it would be for an apartment building to utilize or go through the single family home area. What would the reasoning be behind that? If someone could explain why we would want to do that.
I'm not sure that's the case, Rosalie. I think the idea of the roundabout and the reconfiguration of the roadways is to provide a connection between Point of Pines and the Riverside or Riverfront district so that there's a better connection to the park. But that configuration of the roadway is explicitly intended to keep that traffic out of the Riverside community and, for that matter, out of the Point of Pines community. So that there really is no reason why the access to the development site, for example, has to come through either. We all share your concern about the parking, which will be worked out through the site plan review and potentially ZBA process. But I think this roadway configuration is meant to provide better community access to the park and not require any travel through the Riverside community to get to either the park or the development site.
And also the Point of Pines. So we have two neighborhoods down there that I'm really concerned about.
Yes.
And it's both the Riverside and the Point of Pines. Both of those areas are single family homes that are used to single family neighborhoods, and they're not used to an additional 300 more homes being, and people who live in those homes, infiltrating the entire neighborhoods. And I'm just not certain how they would be able to handle the traffic if that's going to be a problem. But you're saying that the traffic from those, from the development will not impact either the Riverside or the Point of Pines?
That's correct. That new roadway configuration with the rotary will allow the access from the regional highways and otherwise directly to the site, so they don't have to use Mills Avenue as is currently the case, for example, and they certainly don't have to come through Point of Pines.
So maybe I can point it out here. If you're coming south, you would come down 1A, you'd be able to come off here and go in. If you're going south, you'd leave and get right on to the ramp and go south. If you're coming north, you could come down that take this ramp, be able to take a left and come in. If you're leaving to the north, which is probably the least amount of traffic, but if you're leaving to the north, you'd come here around and up to this ramp. That's the intent of the ramp changes.
All right, well, those are the two areas that I'm really concerned with, is the traffic in both the Pines and Riverside and the parking. I think those are two issues that really need to be looked at carefully.
Yeah, I would just add one other point, Rosalie, in that the development as it's configured here along the waterfront really opens up the waterfront to the community use, both Riverside, Point of Pines, and other elements of the Revere community. And as you know, at the current G&J site, that's Riverfront is derelict and inaccessible. So there really is an amenity for the community that is provided around this building and perhaps even within the building itself. But those are certainly issues that will be addressed and explored. We have Michael Tucker, Loretta, Gina, and then Lisa Peterson. So we'll take them in that order.
Thank you.
We'll begin with Michael Tucker. Michael is the ZBA chair. Michael? Michael, you might be muted.
Michael? No.
Okay, we'll come back to Michael. Loretta LaCentra from Riverside. Loretta?
Thank you, Bob. You mentioned that the community voting is something that's going to be starting relatively soon. What does the timeline look like for the building of the Rotary? Is the community voting going to be commencing prior to any of the traffic mitigation?
There still is a lot that has to happen for the community voting to become a public property. And I can't tell you exactly how quickly that will happen, but I think there is a commitment for that to happen, not least by Councilor Powers. I don't know the schedule, but it's likely to move ahead fairly expeditiously. I would estimate that the reconfiguration of the roadway, which requires DOT approval, etc., would probably happen in the next 12 to 18 months. Damien, you may have a better sense of that.
You're going to take down the overpass?
Well, it's not, the existing ramp is the only portion of the existing roadway that's involved. There really is no overpass at that point. But Damien, would that schedule seem about right to you? We also need to deal with funding issues for that, which we can discuss later in this meeting. But does that sound about right?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, that ramp configuration does a lot of things, right? It supports the project. It supports the connection of the neighborhoods to the park from both neighborhoods. We would love to move that along as quickly as possible. And like Bob mentioned, it's a complicated process that's going to require, funding, permitting. It is our intent to try to move that along as quickly as possible, working in conjunction with the city. So, I mean, the time frame Bob's mentioning, potentially, our goal is to try to get it done as soon as possible.
And the hope, I think, Loretta, is that they would be done more or less simultaneously with the activation of the boatyard.
Okay, could I ask one more question? Because we have the parking permits that, there's no parking allowed from midnight to 6 a.m.
Yeah.
What will stop people from parking in the Riverside neighborhood and walking into the park during all other hours, leading up to midnight and after 6 a.m. in the morning?
Well, I think the relative convenience of the on-site parking is what will avoid that. I don't think you have, at least currently, a major on-street parking problem relative to Gibson Park as it exists. It's primarily the need for everybody to come down Mills Avenue to get to it. But we will certainly monitor and, if need be, enforce that, and that is a subject for discussion. It's certainly a reasonable concern. but we'll try to avoid that if at all possible.
Okay, thank you.
Gina.
Thank you. It's really looking great, guys. It's been fun to see the progression and the thinking that's gone into this. I'm excited. I just want to echo, Loretta and Rosalie's concern. Talking to the folks not only in Riverside but in the Point of Pines, big concerns about parking. We have limited parking to begin with, and so I just want to echo that folks are very concerned about that. The other thing that I would love to sort of hear your thinking, and this might be more of a question for Damien and folks, but you're introducing potentially, somewhere between 230 to 280 apartments into the GA site. The Point of Pines is a private beach. We have a heck of a time really keeping it safe and protected. How are you going to help us do that as you're bringing more people into the community, into the neighborhood? What sort of measures or what sort of reassurances can you give the members of the Point of Pines Beach Association that these folks are not going to be encouraged to use it or to be a part of that, or not that that's a selling point for your facility? I'd love to hear your thinking on that.
Yeah, I just have a question. Do you guys have a lot of issues with non-residents of Point of Pines trying to use that beach?
Well, we do, and we do a lot to try to keep it to the members. We do a lot to have a membership and to we pay the dues, we pay the taxes on that. So yeah, we do have a problem.
Yeah, and do you guys have an ability to enforce, like, people? I'm just curious, so I can figure out better even ways. But do you have an ability to enforce if a non-member goes out onto the beach? Can you ask them to leave?
We do what we can.
Yeah. I think for us, I think it starts with an education process. I think some people looking through those windows will see a beach there and they'll be curious about it. And so I think for us, it's going to be part of kind of the introduction for a new resident, which is there's usually a welcome packet. It includes a lot of things, and there's a lot of things about the neighborhood that's included as well too for all these buildings. Relatively sophisticated introductory package, and one of them is going to be, hey, there's a private beach over there and that is not accessible, and you will be subject to fines or enforcement if you use it. So I think number one, we can start with education, and that would be a very, very proactive approach. Beyond that, that seems like probably the smartest and best thing to do. And then obviously, if there are repeat offenders, if there are issues that happen, we'll create some level of communication. It can always be through me in order to notify the building that we are having repeat offenders, and for us to try to deal with them. And we can potentially do some form of penalties on our side as well. We'll be obviously happy to work with you. There's no intention of trying to promote that beach for anything more than a visual from some of the units.
Right. And I would also point out that part of that education is that just south of that private beach, there is a very attractive public beach, the first public beach in America, that I think is completely open to the residents of this complex as it is to any of the residents in the region. Having said that, I'd just like to ask Elle to make a comment. Elle, of course, is a resident of Point of Pines, is, I think, a member of the Beach Association, and also has some comments, I think, on the resident parking issue. Elle?
Yeah, so I know that we've talked a little bit about the resident permit parking. Gina's well aware of this, as well as probably some other folks on the call. So we have done a petition within the Point of Pines area to request residential parking 24 hours a day. I know that has been, I believe, before the Traffic Commission. It's pending. I don't see why we wouldn't be able to extend that to the Riverside as well. And that should really mitigate any of the overflow parking during the daytime. I think Loretta had brought it up, as well as Gina and as well as Eric. So I think I believe that's in motion as we speak. And I think, with this off in the distance, that the potential for that to be realized before any of these developmental changes within the space are actually put in place is very likely.
I also
think that would really alleviate any of that concern. And I think Councilor Powers may be able to speak to that as well.
Yeah, I would just, I see Bob's hand raised, Bob Mara, obviously another resident of Point of Pines, but until recently, the mayor's chief of staff, and he may have some comments on the public parking. Bob, is that why you were raising your hand?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Damien. I think that reassurance that you're willing to work with us at the Point of Pines Beach Association, it goes a long way. And I'm grateful to you for that, and also what you're doing. I think it's going to be great. So thank you.
Thank you, Gina. We appreciate it, and we try to do our best to work with the community and really become good members of the community. So thank you.
Bob, did you have something you wanted to say on the parking issue? And then John Powers has a comment or question.
I would just add, this might be somewhat of a minority opinion, but to a very large extent, the fears of the invasion of the private beach are imaginary. I live across the street from that place, and there are days when I hear about all of these concerns, and I walk across the street and can count the number of people that are on the beach, and it's just not that crowded. So I think that to distract ourselves with rare negative aspects of what could possibly happen is misleading, and I just think we need to be careful about that when it's weighed against all of the positive aspects that are being presented in this plan. So I respect the comments about it, but I don't. Speaking as one person who lives down here, I don't perceive the influx that is often complained about, and I think sometimes the reaction of residents in this neighborhood is that this is like a gated community, and we need to remember that it isn't. And so I would just urge everybody to keep a perspective of what we're talking about in the context of the value and the potential that this development promises.
Thank you, Bob. Councilor Powers. John, you have to unmute.
I did.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay. First of all, for everyone's edification, I asked Gary Ferragamo, president of the Beach Association, to get his people to sign petitions. Probably 3 months ago, I submitted 280 signatures to the Revere Traffic Commission. That currently is on hold. My own opinion is, in the Point of Pines, that should have been the first thing versus the midnight till 6 a.m. because it would have covered everything. Resident parking only. And that is what is going to need to happen down there. People come down there, not just from a proposed building, but from all over. They park in front of people's homes. They go to the beach for the day. Some people, I've had people call me and say, I just got home from work and there's a car parked in front of my house with Illinois plates on it, and they have no place to park. So that was the reason for submitting the signatures, and I think that's going to happen. I also have questions with regard to the number of parking spaces available at that project. I mean, I've heard comments out there before the city council on other issues of, well, we're going to have 1 1/4 spaces or 1 1/2 spaces. I don't know anybody that's got 1 1/4 car or 1 1/2 cars. That doesn't happen. I realize they use that for a formula, but it doesn't work. Okay, it doesn't work. So I'm not happy with the parking that's been proposed. As far as the round turnaround there, the roundabout, I'd like to have a definitive answer is when that is going to start, because I certainly do not want to see cars coming through Riverside to get to the park or to get to a construction site or anything like that. Okay, so I think that the developers have to understand until that roundabout is built and that access to the G&J site are worked out. People visiting that site are going to have to, they're coming north, they're going to have to go north, go down to the turnaround across from the stores down there, turn around and come back and go in the way the G&J people go in now. There should be absolutely no cars related to that proposal, whether it's during construction or when it's built, coming into the Riverside neighborhood. We've had a problem down there with cars. They get off at 1A, they get on John Avenue, they speed down to beat the light to make a little, in the morning when it's busy, to get to that light so they can cut out that time element. There's kids waiting for buses down there. So as a result, I had signs put up there where you can't go between 7 and 9 a.m. in the morning. You can't go into that neighborhood from 1A. But I mean, these are things we have. The first people we should be considering down there are the residents, the people that live on Point of Pines and the people that live on Riverside. And I also have a feeling that if that building, or when that building is built, if it's built, who knows, that people are going to look to go to the beach on a hot summer day, and they are going to make Miranda over into the beach association area. So that's something that's going to have to be enforced. Can it be enforced? Yeah.
Tom, I think those are all valid points that will be taken into account. They have 3 miles of beach that are open to the public. It shouldn't be a problem. I think Damien has suggested that he will educate his tenants with regard to that. I think the parking issue that you mentioned may well be the solution for both Point of Pines and Riverside. That will be played out in the Traffic Commission, but I think the sentiment I'm hearing in this call is that something like that is necessary to assure that there won't be any spillover effect, not necessarily just from this development, but from the use of the park, for example, generally. So we will be taking all of those into account. They certainly will be part of the planning, zoning, and permitting process. Jay Bolton, I think, has a comment, and then Bob Mara, I believe, has another one.
Guys, can you guys hear me?
Yep, you're okay, Jay. Go ahead.
Great. So I'm also not just Jay Bolton. I'm the Commodore of the Point of Pines Yacht Club, as some of you may know. And the James's property and our property are private, beaches as well. So I know that you guys on some of the drawings have proposed, access and this kind of stuff. Maybe it's possible to talk about social membership or beach access membership or something for some of these people, limiting the number, creating some type of wait list. And as some of you know, we do accept social memberships at the yacht club, but we have limited that and because of COVID this past year.
Jay, we lost you.
How about now?
Okay, now.
Okay, sorry. I do want to, I don't know where I lost you. Sorry, I was getting an incoming
You were
call.
talking about social memberships at the yacht club.
Yes, we do offer that, but we have limited that this year because of COVID. And obviously the function hall and the lounge is not open at this particular time, but it is something that we do. So we have contemplated having some type of beach access membership to our private beach, which would not affect the beach association's beach. So that might be something to consider down the line. The other thing I wanted to echo was the job that the particular contractors that are on the call have done by Drift and Arrowwood and all the guys. I mean, everything looks beautiful over there. You guys.
Jay, we lost you again.
Yeah, it sounded like you were about ready to compliment Arrow Street and Redgate. I'm sure they will take it even tacitly. Go ahead. You're back.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Yeah, I was. I just wanted to say you guys do a great job, and you know, I've seen a few of your properties, and it's done well. It's great. But obviously, there's a lot of concerns here of private neighborhoods, you know, overcrowding and all that kind of stuff. So, just as we roll into this project, please keep the Point of Pines Yacht Club abreast of what's going on. I would appreciate that. Thank you.
We certainly do that. I might just note too that the access under the bridge along the waterfront is identified as a potential access because it is an issue that needs to be discussed with the community, number one. But number two, as a practical matter, that can't even be contemplated until the new bridge is in place, which could well be a decade or more away. So it's not an immediate threat if it's perceived as a threat. And if it becomes an opportunity, it will be implemented after the new bridge is up and running. So, Bob Mara, I believe you had a comment as well?
No, I think I'm going to refrain. This isn't the forum for a debate about Point of Pines issues. I'd rather hear more about what the developers have to say consistent with tonight's agenda. So I'm going to withdraw that.
Okay, very good. David, it's back to you then.
Sure. So part of that private site, part of the private development site and part of the G&J site is actually this public pier that we're talking about. And I know Redgate and the city are in, you know, discussions about trying to figure out the best ways to actually develop that, bring that back to life and make that a public amenity as well. And we just have a few images of probably a fishing pier just because of some of the other constraints on that. But definitely a lot of study that needs to go into that, but that's something that will be coming in the future as well. And then we wanted to highlight the garage site a little bit, just to talk about the potential for that site. And again, not that this is a private site and it's going to take the owners of that site to choose to redevelop it or to choose to find somebody else to do that. But it has a fantastic opportunity to have kind of waterfront dining that is pretty unparalleled. So we see that as something that, at some point in the future is kind of a likely scenario. And then just looking at the overall vision, how all these components come together, and just trying to give, a conceptual view of what the G&J site and the revised and renovated shoreline and Gibson Park could and might look like in the future.
David, I believe Lisa Peterson has a question or comment. Lisa?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can now, yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I want to go back to the roundabout if I could.
Sure.
So I think this whole thing is overkill, and I'll tell you why. Because if you're talking about the bridge being elevated 10 years down the road, I think it would be less construction and more efficient if you continue to use your entry and exit that you have right now. Because you could cut a path, you could cut a road from where you guys are down to where the parking at the park is, which would eliminate all these on-ramps and off-ramps in this roundabout. And it would make everything safe. You wouldn't have to decelerate for the state. And as far as the traffic study that you did and the people that are going to be leaving from the roundabout southbound and hopefully exiting before the Thayer Ave and the neighborhood, that's a blind downhill 45 mile per hour slope. At the bottom of it, about a block away, is a crosswalk. So everybody on the other side of 1A that's going to take the bus, especially now that they're going to eliminate that other bus stop, is going to have to cross that crosswalk in front of a bunch of cars that already aren't looking, and now there's additional cars that aren't looking. Not to mention that when you did the traffic study, all the people on the beach side are now going to have to come under that bridge and go down that same thing. So I don't know if that was included, but that's a lot more people, and I don't see the necessity of it. I think everything's set up just fine if you would just expand the road, like I said, from your entry straight to the park parking.
Thank you, Lisa. David?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that I can say to that is that I'm not a traffic engineer. This is going to be part of a Mass DOT process of what Mass DOT feels is the safest and best approach to this interchange.
And some of those traffic numbers that you're questioning, Lisa, are actually coming from the state traffic report, state of congestion. So this whole roadway has been flagged by the state itself as an area that needs to be improved.
Well, that doesn't surprise me.
So we want to kind of talk about the next steps here, and I don't know if...
Excuse me. So
Sorry.
John Powers tried to bring this up, and Rosalie Vincent tried to bring this up, and you guys keep pushing off about you don't know what the traffic commission is going to say, and it's going to be up to the safety rules, and we're going to have to see what people think. And you're just skimming over it, and I don't mean to be pushing about this, but it's important. That you're taking everybody from the beach side and forcing them down this little exit ramp. They can't turn at Oak Island. They can't turn till Revere Street, which they already know is going to be backed up. There's really nothing wrong with the way it's set up now. And it sounds like you don't even want to entertain it because 10 years down the road, someone might have to lift the ramp into the G&J property.
Well, let me just say, first of all, Lisa, all of these issues will be discussed and studied and evaluated in the course of the planning and permitting process that is yet to come. But the one thing that this does solve is the traffic problem for the Riverside community, because right now everybody comes into Gibson Park via Mills Avenue, and that is just not acceptable. The Point of Pines is actually least affected by Gibson Park today, but Riverside is very heavily affected. And leaving the situation as it is now will not improve that for the Riverside community. And that is high on our list of priorities. But in any event, all of these things will be these are not fait accompli. They'll all be studied in great detail through the remaining planning and permitting process yet to come. So it's not that we're not ignoring your comments or the issues that you address at all. Quite the contrary. David?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of a good segue into what the next steps are, because as Bob mentioned, this is not a final design. This is really a vision for the site. So if the vision that we showed for the traffic, the exit ramps, which is really preliminary, if that actually makes traffic worse or less safe, the state and the community, it will not happen. So what we're doing here is creating a master plan for trying to set the site up for the future. And there are a number of next steps. And I think probably the most immediate next step I'd like to ask Elle to talk about is the MVP study.
Thank you, David. So I think we've mentioned numerous occasions that the MVP feasibility study for the Point of Pines and for the Riverside.
Just for the sake of everyone, they may not know what MVP is.
Okay, municipal vulnerability preparedness. So some time ago, I want to say the tail end of 2018, a number of us sat together, many of the folks that are on this call, for a series of workshops that spanned a couple of days. And during that time, we identified this particular area as particularly vulnerable for the city. And therefore, this was our first, at the outcome of that planning process, this was the first grant opportunity that we took advantage of and we were awarded the funding in order to conduct the study. This will entail looking at this particular region, what the current conditions are, factoring in various modeling technology and predicted sea level rise and storm surges. So this is one study that will expand beyond this Riverfront master planning process. That process that we're in right now is only 19-acre parcel. And as John and Jay and David and Sean have all alluded to, that they are trying to do the best that they can to make recommendations that are feasible specifically for these 19 acres. Now, these engineers on the project here have also been in contact and been working with and brainstorming with the project engineer from the MVP study. And they've also read in detail the results of the study from the Metropolitan Planning Organization, who has conducted a resiliency study for Route 1A. That is in its final stages, still in draft form. Once that is available, that will be made available to the public as well. So all of these studies are working in conjunction. So I just really wanted to just be clear about this isn't happening in a vacuum, that the engineers have all touched base, shared data, shared information. The MPO shared data. John was able to put those numbers into real photographs that we can actually look at and understand what sea level rise is going to mean for these neighborhoods. So all of that is happening. The first public meeting is going to be on Tuesday at 6:00. I don't think that the link is posted at this moment, but it will be posted by the end of the day tomorrow. So if anybody that's been tuning into this meeting and contributing would love to have you on board, you're welcome to join us. We're going to run it in a fairly same format. I'm trying to take tips from Julie on Zoom, so I don't know, wish me luck, but anyway, we do hope to see you, and I just wanted to give you an update that is happening exactly on the heels of this study, and that both John, Jay, and David have been excellent at collaborating and informing the next study team as to what their ideas and recommendations have been.
Thank you, Alan.
Thanks, Al. So as far as this particular, the Riverfront Master Plan, we will be issuing a draft report in early to mid-January. The goal of that is to get it in the hands of the advisory group for written comments so that we can have a final meeting at the end of January and kind of complete the report. And it's important, the timing's important because of the Seaport Economic Council's grant. Paul's going to talk about that a little bit more, but we want to set the project up for, funding as quickly as possible. There's a bunch of permitting that has to happen. And really, when we talk about the roadway changes, it goes to every component of this project has to go through permitting, and it has multiple steps and checks and balances and oversight. And Frank and John are much better suited to talk about that. Frank on the public level and the local level, and as well as on state, and John on the state too. So Frank.
So there are a number of features of this project that are going to be subject to environmental permitting, especially when we're talking about the shoreline restoration. And John will get into that in terms of local, state, and federal permits. But on this master plan itself, I think David summed it up. Once the master plan is approved by the advisory committee, it next goes to the planning board for official adoption. Once that's undertaken, the next step is the creation of the overlay zoning district for the private development parcels, which encompass the G&J site and the Mirage property. And that's the only area that would undergo an overlay zoning district, where the zoning would be replaced by a riverfront overlay district. Now, the current zoning there now is industrial and general business. About 2/3 of three-quarters of that site to the north is limited industrial, and there's about a quarter of it that is the Mirage property, its own general business. That would be replaced by a riverfront overlay district that will regulate the uses there, as well as dimensional controls that'll predict what the massing and scale of buildings will be, and setbacks and density and heights. So that has to go to the city council, that overlay district, and the planning board for adoption. Once that takes place and all the elements are in place and regulations are in place for that district, then the developer moving forward would go to the site plan review. And site plan review is an extensive review process that looks at all the issues we've been talking about here, including infrastructure, water and sewer, stormwater management, look at fire safety, access, egress, parking, access and egress from the site, the roadways coming in and out of the site lighting, landscaping, shoreline protection, and mitigation for all those elements. So, and also the design of the building is a very important process in the site plan review process. And what we'll be doing, we'll be challenging the creative juices of the architect to create something that's very iconic, because that coming in over the bridge, that's you see the beautiful Point of Pines to the left, and you see this eyesore to the right. So we're going to convert that eyesore into something that's iconic coming into Revere and takes advantage of that shoreline. We also take a look at how that development and the site plan relates to the surrounding areas. And when I say surrounding areas, we talk about the waterfront and the use of that shoreline. So the site plan review process not only goes beyond the architecture of the building, but it goes into roadway design also. So all the permitting associated with the roadway coming in and out of the site will be a part of the site plan review process. So we're almost like a clearinghouse, which requires the development to go through all the state permitting agencies, federal permitting agencies, before they even get lined up and teed up for a building permit. So they have a long way to go. And we'll be looking at the parking issues, and we'll have a traffic study done on the impact of that rotary from the site into the park. The developers already has a traffic engineer on board looking at a traffic analysis of that. So once it goes through that process, and it's quite a bit of review, then they'll be ready for coming in for demolition of the existing buildings on the site and site preparation. I can go on and on, but that's the basic route to get to the building permit.
I might just add to Frank's very complete description, the comment that is precisely the process that the Suffolk Downs redevelopment went through. Quite successfully, I might add, and with a great deal of community participation, including some people that are on this call. So we do have a very positive precedent for the Riverfront District in what is already happening and is happening in the Suffolk Downs redevelopment. John?
I failed to mention that obviously in the local level, the Conservation Commission would be involved.
And possibly the Zoning Board of Appeal as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll pick it up just talking about the Conservation Commission, because that's actually a state permit that is administered locally. So it's both the state and a local bylaw for wetlands. So anything within 200 feet of the riverfront would have to file. So they'll go before. And important thing to understand for everyone, Neil, is all this is public permitting. So it's all public notification. Everyone will have a chance to review what's happening in the project. You're going to have a lot more detail when they get to these stages. A lot more thorough investigation, more fleshed out designs will be presented forward. They'll have a lot more detail. And, when they file with the Conservation Commission, they'll be required to notify the abutters. Green cards will have to go out. They'll be required for public notification in the newspaper. And that'll review wetlands. But again, that triggers stormwater management policies. And there's 10 standards that they have to meet, where again, they're going to, for each of these properties, it could be each little parcel, they're going to have to create a better situation than what they found. All the existing stormwater needs to be handled, and the proposed situation needs to be better. They're going to have to treat for water quality and for volume. anything within the waterways. So once you get below the tide line, then you're dealing with water quality certifications through Mass DEP, again, a public process. Chapter 91, you'll have a license for permanent structures. And there's got to be it's a public waterfront act is what it's called. So there's got to be, make sure there's a public use to it. Otherwise, there's an offset. And then also when you get below the tide line, you're in waters of the U.S., which means you're getting permits from the Army Corps of Engineers. It's a federal permit. And they do, with CZM, they'll do a consistency review, coastal zone management, I should say. It's another state agency that reviews it to make sure the Commonwealth waterways are being protected in a consistent manner. Then the other thing we have along the western edge of our study area is the from the marsh area of critical environmental concern. We talked about that at the first hearing, that the state Secretary of Environmental Affairs set that aside, 20, 30 years ago as a very critical natural environment that needs to be protected. So any work being done with that, no matter how big or how small, will be filed through the Massachusetts Environmental Protection Act. Again, another process, and that it gets every state agency involved, gets a review on it. So not only are you getting environmental, but you're going to have Mass DOT is going to review the projects. You're going to have the Historical Commission is going to review it. You're going to have the Board of Underwater Archaeology. It's really a comprehensive process just to make sure no stone is unturned. And again, as things develop, everyone's going to have a chance to look into these ideas, look into the designs and what's going to happen. MWRA will look at it if any work's going to be done over one of their water mains. Same thing if there's work done over electrical or gas transmissions. I know we talked last week that natural gas, that might not be an issue, but they're going to have to be notified. Study's going to have to be done to make sure there's capacity to handle all this stuff, and that all gets done. On the federal level too, we talked about the Army Corps, but anytime you're disturbing areas over 1 acre, you're going to be filing with EPA under we call the NIPDES program. So you'll have to make sure that you're controlling not only stormwater from your development, but while things are happening, because we've all seen sites where, a construction site just looks like a big sloppy mud pit, and you don't want that tracking out onto the streets. So once they're getting developed, they'll be covered under that permit, and they'll have regulations and inspections that they'll have to follow to make sure the actual construction process is clean, it's not causing fugitive dust, it's not making the environment around it worse, and that it's all being controlled. There will be fish and wildlife studies if there's essential fish habitat in the rivers. There's the navigable channel for the Saugus River, which is actually a federally maintained project. So the Army Corps might want to review that if any dredging is, we're not proposing any dredging, but if any work gets done close to that channel, they still want to review it just to make sure it's not going to have a negative impact on their process. So there's a very thorough, I don't want to list every single permit you'd have to go through. It's pretty thorough, but there's Mass DEP is going to be involved in multiple manners. The Environmental Policy Act, there's EPA, there's the Army Corps, and there's all the local resources that Frank was talking about, and I'm sure Nick can talk more about how the Conservation Commission looks at things, but they're gonna take a very thorough review to it as well. And if I can just say one thing, I was wrong before, and I want to apologize for that, about the tide gates. I went back and looked at the files. They are not tide gates over on Mills Ave and John Ave. They are, like Frank said, they're check valves, but they're inline check valves, so they're actually under Mills Lane, so you wouldn't see them. They're they're subsurface. They're just out from the outfall, but they do need to be make sure they're inspected and properly functioning. But they're not traditional tide gates. They're inline check valves. So I just want to clarify that. But I think that's pretty comprehensive of the permitting process. So I want to, maybe Paul, you want to talk about the funding as we can move
before I just want to make it clear that, this is for all aspects of the project. It's the private development, but it's also the boat works. It's, all of the pieces, they're all going to have a different list of permits that are required, but they're all going to go through this process. So that is going to kind of impact the timeline for some of these pieces, as well as funding, and that's where we turn it over to Paul.
And David, before Paul starts, I would just say for those in the group that couldn't keep up with all of that, it will be summarized and outlined in the master plan report, so you don't have to take notes. We'll outline it for you.
We all hope John actually did hit all of the.
He did.
Yeah. Hey, this is Damien real quickly, and I just want to reiterate, this is the most extensive entitlement process that we have ever gone through due to the resource areas. So as John eloquently mentioned, we are going to be, there's going to be a lot of eyes on this project at all levels, local, state, and federal. And it's going to be a public process. So I think everyone's going to have the ability to engage, and we will be there to answer questions and make any necessary changes to make this feasible for everybody.
Thank you, Damien. Paul?
Yeah, so there are a number of state programs mainly that we've targeted for this whole development. And
by development, you mean the master plan?
I mean the master plan, I mean the parkland, the public land, support the private development as well. Fortunately, we have a wealth of talent around this table in terms of grant writing expertise, and we collaborate constantly on these matters. So grants are funny things. I'll name a few of them in a moment, but they have cycles and they have annual appropriations and they have changing priorities. And it's our job to keep up with those and to be knowledgeable about those and to apply them when possible. Some of the ones that we're looking at are, of course, the Seaport Economic Council, MassDOT's Complete Streets, Mass Works program, which some of you are familiar with, the Park program, which it used to be called by different names when I was doing this full time. MVP itself, as El has pointed out, is the city's Community Improvement Trust, which is a substantial tool because it can be used for the match of many of these grants that is required. There's also, of course, Redgate's contributions to this planning effort, for one thing, and also to their physical improvements and whatever they commit to. Yeah, CZM Coastal Resiliency, thanks to the teams chiming in here. And of course, anything else that we can find. And who knows what's happening on a federal and a state level. So there are a number of programs. The one that's the most important in my mind is the Seaport Economic Council. And by virtue of this whole exercise, we've partnered with them. And that's an important partnership. In fact, yesterday I spoke with the executive director and advised her of where we were in this process and the scope of this process. And she was rather amazed. We only got this grant in September, I think, or October. Yeah. So she's not accustomed to having such quick turnaround and product come out the end. In fact, we began to discuss whether or not we could do a presentation of the final plan at the February Seaport Economic Council biennial meeting. That's a meeting where they just do status reports on projects. It's kind of like how they justify what they've been doing. And I think it's a great opportunity for us. I would like to have us do that. And that in turn would queue us up for a grant application for a real first phase project in May. I'm not sure what that would be yet. We need to discuss that internally. We need to sort out the options. But I see a good track for this whole thing. And I some pieces will be harder than others, but it's all doable. So have faith and let's all work together.
We're coming to the end of our time together tonight, but I'm not surprised Eric has one more comment or question. Eric, are you with us here?
I am, Bob. I have two items. I just wanted to circle back to a previous resident suggestion about flooding the tennis courts for an ice hockey rink. I just wanted to resurface that, and hopefully that could fall into the plan. I know we have some residents with experience that build rinks in their backyards down there that would like to help out. So I wanted to make sure that got resurfaced. And then secondly, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for all the work that's gone into this. And I'd love to know, what would the price tag be on all of this proposal?
You don't want to know.
We couldn't even afford it. Come on.
You don't want to know.
With that, I think there's one more comment before I close out the meeting from Nick Molason, I think appropriately so, given everything that John had run through there. But Nick, do you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I just want to state something. And as far as conservation, I'm going to be all over this project to make sure everything is followed properly and according to what I got to do from as DP. But on another note that not maybe a lot of people don't know is I work for a private contractor from Mass DOT. And in order for them to raise that bridge, if they're going to go up 3 feet, they're going to go out like 300 feet each way.
That's right.
So that exit that's there now might not be there in 10 years from now. So that's a huge difference. So I know some people have said we should keep that exit and use that. That's probably not going to be there when they raise that bridge because they got to bring it out. You go up 3 feet, you're going to go out so many. So I just wanted to make sure people knew that. And someone that's not in the business or an engineer doesn't know that. They just think raise it up 3 feet and you're good. Well, you're not good. There's a lot more work to that. Thank you, Bob.
And Nick has his Patriots jacket on to remind us that there's a football game that starts in 20 minutes.
Wrap it up.
Let's go. Again, I want to thank everybody that's worked on this project. Everyone's done a great job. Resident participation, everything's been great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
And I believe we have a final comment from Jessica Janino.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, guys. I just wanted to take a moment and thank you. I know we've been on a series of these meetings every Thursday night, and I think they've been incredibly informative, and I'm excited about the potential for this site. I think we have a great developer and some great partners to help make this happen. I'm excited about the possibility of, rowing and all of the wonderful things that we've discussed over these last 2 meetings. So, cheers to you, Bob, and your team. You guys have done a phenomenal job. Frank, Elle, Julie, this is just a really exciting project, and I think getting the input from the residents and the people that it directly impacts is just so important. Being on the council, I've seen some of the proposals that have, come through for this property, and I've dealt with some of the stress, and I just really think this is the best possible option for the residents, and I'm really happy to see that it's something that everyone can enjoy and, has a voice and has a part of. So thank you guys for making this possible.
And we will end, I keep saying, with final word from our city council president. Patrick, I believe you have a comment or question?
I didn't want to upstage Councilor Janino or Representative-elect Janino, but I did want to echo her comments in saying, whichever direction this heads, this is a community meeting on steroids, and I do applaud everyone from the development side and from the community side and from the city side who took part in this. And I think that, again, whichever direction it heads, we can really appreciate the inclusion in the process. So thank you very much. And
thank you, Patrick. And on those final notes, I just want to conclude. Paul said that the Seaport Economic Council was surprised at how much we got done in such a limited amount of time. I must say, everyone around this table is also really impressed by how productive we have been over the last 4 weeks. And there is no question that a large share of the credit for that goes to our development team, to David and Amy and John and Jay and Sean. They have done an absolutely remarkable job listening to what the community had to say and responding to it in a very professional way. And the other aspect of that is all the input and feedback that you, the members of the advisory group, provided. I think I must agree with all of the elected officials. This has really been a remarkably efficient and effective process that we have brought together very quickly. This is the last in our series of meetings before the holiday period, but as David has already noted, we will be coming back together to review the document that is being produced while we're all enjoying the holidays by our development team in conjunction with the city. And we think we'll have something really interesting based on all the work that has been done for you to review. As David said, we will get it in your hands before we meet again so that we can have your written comments and have a pretty good sense of how we can get to a final document. But it's absolutely remarkable what has happened here over the last 4 weeks. And David and your team, we really owe you a great debt of gratitude. You've done a really outstanding job for the community and for the city of Revere. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Bob, and thanks to everyone for all of the input. We hope that we've actually been able to address everything that you guys have put in front of us, and we know that, you know, there's time to talk more.
Very good. With that, it is exactly 8 o'clock, so everyone is released for football or whatever. And I really thank you for everything you've done thus far, and anticipate a final meeting to see if we can't wrap all of this up in a very productive way. And thank you, Damien, and your team as well. You've contributed a lot to the discussion in the last couple of sessions.